I don't know how we start these things.
Yeah, especially when it comes to something like a 17-year-old wanting to bang a 45-year-old.
Hi, I'm Ben, HBI2K Creighton.
And I'm Scott, KaiserNeko Frerichs.
And we're here to talk about handling, or an anime that handles a touchy subject really quite well, After the Rain.
Yeah, it's a series all about a waitress. That's the show.
Yep, that's the whole show. She serves delicious desserts to all her patrons.
Oh my god, they do look delicious, don't they?
They do, actually. No, actually, the show is all about how she falls in love with her 45-year-old manager.
Dun, dun, dun.
And this is a show that it did not wind up on our watch list last season, largely because we were judging based on a plot description that leaned really heavily on 45-year-old manager, 17-year-old waitress. She believes that it doesn't matter. You don't need a reason to fall in love. It just happens.
And you know, that's very true. Sometimes you just fall in love, and sometimes you don't want to follow up on that love. Maybe sometimes that love is bad for you, and sometimes anime doesn't tell you that. Sometimes anime has a tendency to be like, no, go for it. Go for it, though. Who cares what other people think?
Yeah, and actually, that was such a misleading description because there are lots of reasons why these two are attracted to each other, and not always the most obvious ones, and a large part of this show is examining those reasons.
Yeah, and it's very nice to see because when it comes down to attraction and love and sex, there are a lot of things that you don't think about that goes into all of those things because it's all about the ego, superego, and all that fun stuff and the qualities that we attribute to other people that we think are the reasons that we're in love with them, but really are just surface quality stuff.
But before we get into all that, let's talk about why might this subject be so touchy?
Because she's a 17-year-old high school girl and he's a 45-year-old manager.
But Scott isn't 17 years old. The age of consent in a lot of places, it's legal. Things that are legal are automatically morally fine.
When I get people on Twitter who call me out for like, it's legal, man. What's your problem with it? I'm like, just because it's legal doesn't mean I want to promote it. It doesn't mean I think it's good. I just want to respond with, bestiality is legal in like 10 states at least. Which is, that's basically the same. 17-year-old having sex with a 45-year-old might as well be having sex with a horse.
But, I've listened to and or read a fair amount of Dan Savage, and he has this campfire rule. Do you know what I'm talking about?
A campfire rule? What's that?
It's in relationships between people with a large age gap. He believes that it is the responsibility of the older partner to leave the younger partner as you would a campsite when you're out camping. Leave them in better shape than you found them.
Huh.
Yeah, and part of this rule, in his mind, I'm not sure if I 100% agree with this, but part of this rule is not letting them believe that it's a forever thing. And that's something that came to mind as I was watching the early episodes of the show and not entirely sure how to feel about it, was I'm sitting here thinking, okay, they are doing this well. They are getting into these characters' heads in a way that I appreciate that seems honest and true to real life. I don't think this ends with them together getting married happily ever after, cause what's she gonna do? Be the stepmom of his, by the way, he's got a kid.
Oh yeah.
She is, and he's I don't know, this kid's 6, 7, 8. So she's about 10 years older. She is closer in age to this literal small child than she is to this ostensible romantic interest.
When they are out in public, people assume she's his daughter, and rightfully so.
Yeah. So yeah, this is not, it's not impossible. Stranger things have happened, but that's not a good on-paper basis for a long-term lasting relationship.
And when it comes to a story about that kind of romance, frankly, there's a way you might be able to go about it. I'm sure there's a way to tell a lot of complicated and controversial stories. But when it comes to anime, no offense to the Japanese, sometimes it's more, how do you put it? Gross then?
Yeah, and I think when it's gross, it's often because they tend to gloss over issues like, an age gap is an obstacle. And oftentimes it's just oversimplified like, oh no, that's just what society tells you. You should go with your heart and do who you love.
Do who you love. That's right. See, here's the thing. So I remember back to when I was 17 years old and I shouldn't have been dating damn near anybody, much less somebody who was 20 years older than me minimum. So when you have this whole setup, there's this part of me that's sitting back thinking, how in the world do you tackle this where it's realistic that somebody could get into a long-term relationship? Because when you're 17, the difference between 17 and 21, and I tell this to a lot of people, the difference between the emotional maturity between an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old is staggering. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the drinking age, etc., but beyond that, it's just a crazy amount of development that you go through because you are thrust into a whole brand new world. You are learning things that are way different from what you witnessed in middle school, high school, and even college. So yeah, you could do it, but
I mean, it's why the half your age plus 7 rule is a thing. It's why that acceptable gap gets wider the older you get, because the difference between that 4-year difference between 17 and 21 is super significant. A 4-year difference between 40 and 44 is basically nothing.
Yeah, essentially. While we're always in construction, the actual amount of development that we go through, say, that I've gone through over the last couple of years has definitely slowed down from when I was younger.
Yeah, I'm basically stagnant as a human being now, and it's great.
Yep, no, sooner or later, you're just going to start falling apart. But yeah, so here we see a couple of characters that, and I feel like almost any other manga or anime could have easily wound up just being this sugary romance that, may be harmless in terms of the actual relationship they get into. So that's a bad precedent and unrealistically tackles what is a complicated, some might even say problematic issue. And here, however, they're just amazingly well-written characters, just to put it flatly. Let's talk about what this show does particularly well in terms of introducing these concepts.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little about sympathetic, well-written, well-rounded characters and viewpoints, because it gets into some of the reason why an age gap can be such an obstacle is because the things that attract you to somebody at 17 are maybe not the same things that attract you 20 years later.
Yeah.
Well, that's only a problem, again, if you expect it to be a forever thing, because lots of the things that attract this 17-year-old girl to her 45-year-old manager is he likes literature. He has a more worldly outlook on life than she does. He seems very sophisticated and mature to her. That's a huge attraction when you're 17 and don't have those qualities yourself. But even just 5 years later, spend 5 years reading literature yourself, and the fact that he reads literature is no longer an attractor to you because now you're on his level.
Yeah. So let's talk about Akira Tachibana, our prospective main character. She's a track runner, and at the beginning of the story, we realize that she's had a terrible accident. As we find out, she tore her Achilles tendon in an accident while running. And thus, she was off the team, and she was a star runner. She was amazing. She was basically looked up to by everybody who was doing track at the school. And so when she fell out of it, everything fell out of whack for her. Her life basically fell apart. And her friends still try to keep her involved. They ask her questions. They want her back out there to talk to them and be a part of their socialization, but she can't, because all she sees is a life that she can no longer be a part of.
Yeah, so she's basically lost her entire identity. But the thing about being 17 is that there are a whole bunch of identities to try on for size. And the one that she tries on is, what if I had this job as a waitress and I tried to fit into that world? And by the way, this guy who was really kind to me at a very vulnerable moment, what if I was just super into him? And what's his deal? I want to know everything about him. And by the way, I want to date him.
Yep. And it becomes this infatuation more than just full-on romance, because in him she sees a new identity, as you said, a way to become whole again, to escape her problems.
And so it's all in service of the story and characters. That's first and foremost. It's not there to provide a fantasy for the audience to insert themselves into. And that's what I was so afraid of going just from that summary is, so the audience is supposed to identify with this older man, and this is their fantasy of what if this younger woman was just kind of into me.
Yeah. But even so, ignoring the things that it doesn't do wrong, the things that it does right are more than numerous. We have these beautiful scenes of just them, talking to each other and learning about each other. These very human moments where by talking to each other, they learn more about themselves. And through what becomes a mutual infatuation, we see what they're looking for, what they want, what they miss.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot about Akira Tachibana, but her manager, from his perspective, we see that anytime he imagines himself with her, it's never as this 45-year-old man with a young son. It is always, remember when I was 17, when the world seemed brand new and open to me? It's always as a proxy for his own youth that he feels in a lot of ways is lost. So from his perspective, it's equally kind of an infatuation, but in a very understandable, relatable way, and not for nothing, in a way that doesn't sexualize or objectify her to an undue extent. I mean, she's a beautiful young woman, and that is not ignored. It is not a non-factor, but it gives us more to relate to him than just, oh God, she's hot.
Yeah, it would be a disservice if the story did not actually explore that attraction to her, because he's a 45-year-old man. If he's not going to find something attractive about her physically, then we've gone from playing it safe to just
unrealistic.
Yeah. So the story does, there are some points maybe that languish a little much on her legs, on her body, but a lot of it is in service to the audience also finds her to be very attractive and very interesting, and I don't know, it's a beautiful show as well. Like, it is, oh my God, gorgeous.
Yeah, not to go too far off on that tangent, but I am always willing to extend a little more leeway, a little more time to prove itself to something that is just so pretty to look at.
I felt like I was watching something from the 90s with the modern aesthetic. A lot of those moments where, those moments where she's starting to feel the love, where something's kindling up inside her, and then suddenly all the sound falls out except for the sound of bubbles. And this kaleidoscope of lights moves in the background, and it's these gorgeous shots that just really set the mood, that really let you understand, these feelings inside of her are so pronounced and so, they cut through the world. And there are so many moments like that throughout the show. Moments that just use sound and visuals to communicate these emotions, and I loved it. I every time it happened, it made me feel like I was watching something I hadn't seen in years. And a lot of that comes down to not only, great direction, but the mangaka, Miyazuki, I think it is Miyazuki. You can feel the art and the composition there, and it's translated so well on screen.
So I think this is kind of the point at which we can start to transition into some pretty big spoilers for the end here.
Yeah, so look, before we get into spoilers, let me just tell you, if you haven't seen After the Rain, if you were watching this as a perspective to get into this show, get into this show. Unless the subject matter that we've talked about is uninteresting to you, we get it. But if you like complicated stories, if you like human stories, if you want a beautiful story about two people at opposite ends of their life trying to figure things out, this is spectacular, and I highly recommend it.
Absolutely. That said, spoilers are fair game from this point going forward. If you haven't seen it and you want to, go see it.
All right, are they gone?
It's real good. Yeah.
Are they gone?
Get them out of here.
Do they fuck?
They don't fuck.
They don't fuck.
Not only do they not fuck, they never kiss.
Nope.
Nope.
They hug.
Yeah,
They hug.
But we touched before on the fact that it's not romanticized. It is played very much as an infatuation, not true love.
Yep.
Which I very much appreciate. But then there's a pivot point. There's a point just about halfway through where there's a hilarious scene, by the way, where Akira Tachibana introduces herself in the first person in voiceover. I'm a waitress at this restaurant. And he introduces himself. I'm the manager. We're friends.
Yep.
And boy, if that wasn't relatable, that I've got this attraction, I've got this infatuation. I know it is inappropriate. Not only do we talked about the age gap, also the power gap. He is her manager. It would be a serious ethical violation for them to actually be dating. I mean, I suppose they do go out on a couple of quote unquote dates.
Yeah.
But they've decided we're gonna be friends. And at the end of that episode, she's talking to her coworker and says, hey, do you think friendship can ever turn into romance? And you realize, yeah, she doesn't want to just be friends.
Yeah, no, she still really wants to bone her manager.
But by the end, it's a slow pivot. But by the end, you realize, no, actually what she needed was a friend. Somebody to help her through this transition. Somebody older and more experienced and with a broader perspective on life to kind of remind her, hey, you're still 17. You still got your whole life ahead of you. Everything's gonna be okay. And just to kind of quietly care about her.
Yeah, and that's not something he realizes. That's not something he gets. And some things kind of get in the way of him kind of realizing that, because so we talk a lot about, again, Akira Tachibana's infatuation with him, but that infatuation does run both ways. As we said before, there's a lot of him seeing a younger version of himself when he's around her. There's a moment where they're sitting at this cafe and he's looking around and it's like, there's nothing but young people here. And then he looks to her and for a split second, it's a shot of him. As a teenager sitting across from her. And in that moment, I realized I loved this show. I love this show because in that one moment, as somebody who's only 31, I'm only 31. And in that moment, I'm like, I remember what it was like to be a kid. I remember what it was like to just go out and have fun and not worry about a lot of these things, where my future was any damn thing I wanted it to be. And so in that moment, the art and the animation and the composition of this and the direction of the show is so remarkable. And you just find out over the course of this that he's letting himself often fall into this, regardless of the fact that he knows it can't work out. At no point does he even consider that this should happen. But he still lets these things go because he doesn't understand the real route that he should probably take.
Yeah, well, and part of it, I think, is that he's letting himself fall into the fantasy. But part of it is that he is responding to a need that she has that on some level he knows he can fulfill, and she's fulfilling a need for him. She's reminding him that the last 25 years of his life have not gone to waste, that he's not just past his prime. Like, he's still got a lot of life ahead of him and a lot going for him that he doesn't fully credit.
Yeah, he's a writer. As the story actually gets into that in the second half, I feel like, and we find out about his past. We meet one of his friends who returns to him, who's a accomplished writer, as opposed to him who kind of fell off in his later years and has blamed his age. And I love the fact that the writer comes back to him and is like, you didn't stop writing because you got old, and in kind of in a way is like, you got old because you stopped writing. and there's some great scenes where you realize that, yeah, at some point you kind of settle into your life and you need something to get you going again. And I don't know, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful little story, and just following, and it doesn't always tie back into the both of them. He finds his old friend and she finds hers, one of her other running mates, who comes back to her, and you find out that she's trying to desperately get back into her life. And that's a big part of the development in the final liqueur of the series.
Yep. But we could sit here and go blow by blow all day. And I wish we had, because I wish it had been on our watch list last season.
I know. I know.
Thanks for sitting here with us and indulging us as we kind of tried to get into how this show, out of all the shows we've watched, managed to wend its way through this minefield of a subject matter just expertly and effortlessly.
Yeah, I cannot tell you. I could list off flaws in this series, but I'm pretty sure they would all be nitpicks. This isn't flawless, but it's beautiful. It's an amazing story, and I am so happy that our fans were able to talk us into watching it. Thank you all so much.
Yep. Thank you to everybody at home. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on Patreon, thank you so much for the love and support, and we will see you guys next time.
Later.